and we're going to talk about value pricing. And I'm going to start by being fairly controversial. Well, actually, no, I'm going to start by being very simplistic, and then I'm going to get controversial. So we all know, okay, so welcome to everybody who's been on before. I recognize some names, and welcome to the new people. So we all know the hourly billing formula is very simple. It's hours worked multiplied by an hourly rate. That equals the fee that we bill. For some reason, many in the accounting industry have partly adopted this as if it was ordained from high above. Thou shalt bill by the hour. I'm here to dispel a bit of that myth. And again, I'm just continuing on from people, pioneers like Ron Baker, Ed Kless. They've done a lot of work on it. The controversial part, my statement for today, is that hourly billing is inherently a conflict of interest between us and our clients. And the rationale is plain and simple. Our clients want us to do things as cheaply as possible, so they will try to negotiate both our hourly rate and the hours that we work. We're ignoring completely what they value in what we do. We're ignoring the outcome, and thus it's a conflict of interest. Value pricing, on the other hand, when I work with firms, the most successful, profitable, lucrative ones have some variation of value pricing. And we'll get into what is value pricing in a minute, but for now, I just want you to think about value pricing is from the customer's point of view, and effectively you're trying to identify what they value most in what you do. So implementing value pricing, in my experience, is helping people increase top-line revenue, profitability, and more importantly, it builds stronger client relationships. Okay. So we're going to start with billing concepts. We're going to talk about billing versus pricing. And then we're going to talk about fixed price agreements or value pricing. And then I'll share some further resources. And of course, I am an educator at heart, so we'll also have some action steps. So we're going to start with what we know, and then we'll transition over to the more complicated, more complex. Hourly billing, as I already said, fees are equal to hours worked times the hourly rate, and it does cause that inherent conflict with our clients. The interesting thing, and this is where I struggle with firms who blindly stick to hourly billing, the more efficient you are, the better systems you have, more experience you have, the faster you do something. If you're sticking to that hours times rate, unless you're raising your rate appropriately every year consistently, which by the way can also cause some conflict, unless you're raising your rates regularly, if you reduce the hours worked, you take a pay cut. I was at a conference about 3 weeks ago, and I was talking to an older gentleman. He had a fairly successful firm, and he was looking at some cloud technology, and the promise of the technology was that it would eliminate about 80% of his data entry. And I kid you not, his objection, one and only, and you can't overcome this, was if you eliminate 80% of my time, you just eliminated 80% of my revenue, therefore I'm not even going to consider this. And there was no room in his mind to consider that there was a better way to bill than by the hour. Okay. Now, the key to hourly billing is the focus is on our internal costs to produce a service. And I admit, as a coach, every now and then I get guilty of that, thinking about how much time goes into it. But the reality is our clients don't care about time. If you've ever had a client come in and say, I'd like to buy an hour of your time, please just say yes all the time or yes once in a while. Type it in the chat box. But honestly, I'm guessing most of you, and feel free to type in no as well, I'm guessing most of you have never sold an hour of your time just for the sake of selling an hour of your time. Okay, so Jim said yes. I'm guessing, Jim, that there was some sort of output or something they wanted. It wasn't just an hour of your time to sit and converse or stare at them. There's something that you're giving. And again, it's really hard to value time because I call it the bums in seats model. If I'm sitting at a desk twiddling my thumbs, I'm not adding value to anyone. Again, hourly billing is really cost plus pricing, and it completely ignores the value of the service in the eyes of the client. Now, show of hands, or just again in the chat box, is a client who's being audited by IRS going to pay you, willing to pay you more for the same service or less? Okay, so your answer is more or less. Will a client pay you more if they're being audited by the IRS to do something, or less if they're not being audited? My experience, most of the time, people in that stressful situation, they value it more, they appreciate it more, and they'll pay more. And I'm seeing that pretty much across the board. So the other piece to hourly billing, the final piece, is, thank you, Tad, clients often experience sticker shock. Now, if any of you have slow paying clients and you're hourly billing, it might not be that they don't have the money. Usually my experience, when clients are habitually late paying things, it's because in some way they resent the bill, they got surprised by it, and they don't want to argue with you, so they just don't pay it. And it's sort of their passive aggressive way of punishing you by not paying it. So eventually they'll pay, but my experience is every time a client gets a surprise bill, there's that sticker shock element. And what that does is it jeopardizes the client relationship. So over time, the more issues that you have, the more likely you are to lose that client. So if every year you fight over the bill, odds are that that client is at risk. Okay. Now, I also see a lot of accountants using what I will loosely call value billing. In Ron Baker's world, this term doesn't actually exist. He doesn't believe in it. So I will use it loosely because this is what a lot of accountants I know do. And basically what they are doing is they'll do the work, they'll look at their hours, they'll look at their rate, and let's say WIP comes to $5,000. They'll look at it and say, there's no way the client's going to pay this. I'm going to bill $2,500. So it's sort of hourly billing, but we soften it. And I always say we soften it because I've yet to see an accountant who consistently, regularly marked things up. Most accountants, when they look at the bill, again, they sort of look at it, would I pay this? And from their own perspective, they're looking at, was the time reasonable? We're adjusting WIP after the fact. Now, you'll see this, some firms have a minimum fee. That's about the only time where I ever see significant, consistent write-ups. But if a lot of firms, if the fee based on hours is above their minimum, they'll usually just write it down to the minimum because, typically we didn't write down what we did that's unique. We didn't worry about the scope. So we've sort of ignored extra value. And again, usually in the case of value billing, we're doing it from our own perspective. We're not thinking about the client and what they get out of it. So the key to billing is it's done after the fact. And usually there's an element of surprise. And, if you're doing the billing and you're like, oh, I hope they pay this, that's sort of what I'm getting at in terms of value billing. It's always done after the fact. Nobody likes surprises. So, if you went to a car dealership and said, hey, fix my car, and they said, okay, an oil change is $300, and you show up later to get the car and it's $1,000, you're going to be very upset with the dealership. Exact same thing applies to our clients. They don't want surprises. So billing is done after the fact.